Nalan had always believed the land remembered everything, every footstep, every whisper of wind, every promise ever spoken under the open sky. She grew up with the wide mountains around her like old friends, watching the sunrise paint the rocks in colors no one could name. Her people had lived there for generations, moving with the seasons, gathering plants and herbs, telling stories that made the nights feel warm. For Nalan, the world had always been full of meaning. Every stone had a history. Every tree carried a lesson. Every voice in her community mattered. But life had slowly begun to change. It began quietly, like the first drop of rain before a storm. Travelers appeared more often near their land, bringing new rules, new borders, new expectations. Her people were encouraged to move, to leave the places where the memories of their parents and grandparents rested. Some went, hoping for peace. Others stayed, hoping the world would return to how it had been. Nalan's own family tried to stay together, but the confusion of changing times made it harder each season. Eventually, after many uncertain months, Nalan became separated from her relatives. They had gone ahead to another settlement, believing she would join them soon. But she never reached them. While traveling to meet them, she encountered a group of traders who claimed they wished to help her find her family. Exhausted and without much choice, she followed them, trusting the hope they offered. The traders, however, had different intentions. They were not kind people, though they wore friendly smiles. They saw Nalan not as a person with a story, but as something rare that could bring them profit. They knew the people in the next town were curious about anyone from her culture, especially now that fewer were seen passing through. The traders misunderstood her background, exaggerating it in ways that made her seem almost legendary. When they learned she might be among the last women from her small band to be seen near the region, their interest in her grew even more. Nalan sensed something was wrong when the traders insisted she travel with them to a dusty frontier town instead of the settlement where she thought her family might be. She asked them many times why they were changing direction, but they always answered with vague excuses. Just a small stop, they would say. Just some business. Her questions never received a clear explanation. The closer they came to the town, the more she felt the weight of uncertainty growing in her chest. When they reached the town, she saw unfamiliar buildings made of rough wood, leaning slightly as if tired from standing in the wind. The main road was crowded with people who stared at her with a mixture of curiosity and misunderstanding. She kept her head held high, refusing to let their eyes shape her identity. She had pride, even in confusion. She would not let strangers take that away. The traders took her to a saloon, a place where people gathered to talk loudly, laugh too hard, and exchange coins for goods and favors. The air inside was warm and dusty. Lamps hung on the walls, lighting the room with a soft orange glow. People turned their heads when she stepped in. Their conversations paused for a moment. She could feel their attention like a weight. But she stayed calm, keeping her hands steady at her sides. She soon learned why she had been brought there. The traders had arranged a kind of sale, presenting her not as a traveler searching for her family but as something exotic and valuable. They spoke as if she were an object, not a woman with memories, hopes, and responsibilities. They exaggerated her story, telling the crowd she was the last Apache woman, a phrase that made her heart sink. It wasn't true. She knew her people still lived, still breathed, still held onto their ways. But the traders used these claims to spark excitement in the room. Nalan did not shout or protest. She did not plead. Instead, she chose silence. Silence was her strength. In silence, she kept her dignity. In silence, she kept her truth. As the crowd gathered, people looked her over with curiosity, some whispering to each other, some trying to guess her age, her origins, her story. A few seemed kind. A few seemed indifferent, and some looked at her in ways that made her stomach twist. She stood tall, even with so many eyes on her. She remembered her mother once telling her that silence was sometimes a shield stronger than any spoken word. So she used it now, standing like a stone rooted deeply in the earth. Hours passed slowly. The traders moved around the room, talking excitedly, trying to stir more interest. Nalan imagined her family somewhere out there, perhaps wondering where she had gone, maybe searching for her. The thought brought a small ache to her heart, but it also gave her strength. She would find her way back someday. She promised herself that. The sky outside shifted from bright afternoon to soft evening. The dusty windows glowed amber with the light of the setting sun. Nalin watched the changing colors, finding calm in the beauty that still existed even in places where she felt out of place. Nature, at least, had not forgotten her. The room buzzed with talking and footsteps. Some people left, others entered. Every now and then, someone approached her with a curious expression, trying to speak to her. But she gave no answer. Not because she couldn't, but because she chose not to let strangers write her story for her. She wanted to keep a part of herself untouched by their assumptions. The traders began preparing for their big moment, gathering the crowd's attention. They pushed tables aside and cleared space near the center of the room. Nalin stood quietly, waiting. She did not know exactly what would happen next, but she knew she would face it with as much calm as she could manage. Her mind drifted back to memories of her childhood, collecting berries with her cousins, listening to elders tell stories by the fire, swimming in the cool streams that ran through the forest. Those memories felt like a soft blanket around her shoulders now. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the warmth of those memories steady her breathing. When she opened her eyes again, she noticed people settling into chairs and leaning against pillars, ready to watch whatever the traders planned. The air felt heavier now, filled with anticipation. Nalin's heartbeat stayed steady. She had faced uncertainty before. She would face this, too. Yet even with her courage, she was aware of the challenges ahead. She was far from home, far from anyone who knew her voice or her story. The traders were eager to profit from her presence. The crowd was eager for entertainment, and she stood alone between them, quiet but unbroken. What she did not know not yet was that someone else would soon enter the room. Someone whose presence was gentle, almost invisible at first. Someone who didn't shout or push or demand attention. Someone who lived a simple life and rarely expected much from the world. Someone whose quiet nature would shift her path more deeply than she could imagine. But for now, Nalin remained alone at the center of a small frontier town, surrounded by strangers, holding onto her inner strength, waiting for whatever would come next. She didn't know it yet, but her fate was about to change. Samuel Carter was a man most people noticed only when he stood directly in front of them. And even then, some would still look past him. He was the kind of person who moved through the world softly, never demanding space, never raising his voice. People in town often said that if calmness had a shape, it would look a lot like Samuel. He lived alone on a quiet ranch outside the town, where the sound of wind brushing across the tall grass was his closest companion most days. Samuel had lost much in life, though few knew the details. He didn't talk about his past. He didn't feel the need to. Some said he used to laugh more when he was younger, back when his world felt fuller. Others believed he simply liked solitude. But whatever the truth was, Samuel carried it with him in the gentle way he walked, in the peaceful look in his eyes, and in the slow, thoughtful manner in which he spoke when he did speak at all. On the day he rode into town for supplies, he expected a simple trip. He needed flour, lantern oil, rope, and maybe a few fresh apples if he could find them. He planned to be in and out before the afternoon sun grew too warm. His horse, a calm old mare named Daisy, trotted slowly beside him as he entered the dusty main road. As soon as he reached the center of town, Samuel noticed something unusual. People were gathering near the saloon, talking excitedly. He could hear murmurs floating through the air, words like rare, unbelievable, and you won't believe this. Samuel wasn't the kind of man who chased rumors, but even he could sense that something different was happening. He tied Daisy to the post outside the general store and stepped inside. Mr. Porter, the storekeeper, greeted him with his usual cheerful nod. As Samuel placed flour and a few other items on the counter, he overheard two men whispering behind him. "Did you see her?" one asked, in a tone filled with wonder. Samuel tried not to listen, but the words drifted to him anyway. "They say she might be the last of her people still seen around here." "That can't be right," the other replied softly. "That kind of talk always gets stretched." "Maybe, the first man said, but the traders sure seem proud of it. Samuel frowned slightly, barely noticeable, but still a frown. He didn't like the way the first man spoke. Something about his excitement felt wrong, like he was talking about an object instead of a human being. He collected his supplies, thanked Mr. Porter, and walked back outside. The sound from the saloon had grown louder. People were still going in and out, some with curious faces, others shaking their heads uncertainly. Samuel didn't plan to stare or judge, but his steps naturally slowed as he walked past the swinging wooden doors of the saloon. And then he heard a sentence that made him stop completely. "They're calling her the last Apache woman." Samuel didn't know much about distant tribes or cultural stories, but he knew one thing with absolute clarity. No person should ever be spoken about like that. Like they were a thing, a symbol, or a prize. Something inside him stirred, quiet but firm. He hesitated, unsure whether he should step inside or continue with his day. Daisy, still tied outside the store, flicked her ears toward him as if sensing his hesitation. Samuel took a breath, let it out slowly, and pushed the saloon doors open. The warm, dusty light inside settled around him. People filled the room, talking in clusters. Some leaned across tables. Others stood with drinks in their hands. Near the center of the room, Samuel saw a small, open area where several traders stood proudly, attempting to draw attention. And then he saw her. Nolan stood in calm silence. Her posture straight, her eyes steady. She didn't shrink away from the people watching her. Instead, she held herself with a quiet dignity that made Samuel pause. Her presence felt strong and gentle at the same time, like the earth after a peaceful rain. Samuel didn't know her story, but he didn't need to. He only needed to see the way people were looking at her curiously, eagerly, as if she were part of a show, and he knew immediately that something about this entire moment was wrong. He took a step forward, blending into the back of the crowd, hoping to observe without drawing attention. The traders spoke loudly, describing Nalan to the room as if they owned her story. Samuel listened with growing discomfort. Their words were exaggerated, filled with claims designed to excite the crowd. They spoke as if they knew everything about her, though it was clear they knew nothing at all. Nalan, however, did not react. She kept her calm expression, her gaze fixed on something distant, or perhaps inward. Samuel found himself admiring her strength. Even surrounded by strangers and uncertainty, she remained still, like a rooted tree refusing to bend. Samuel didn't know what he was supposed to do. He had come for rope and flour, not complicated decisions. He wasn't a man who sought trouble, and he wasn't someone who rushed into situations without thinking. Yet as he stood there, watching the traders misrepresent Nalan's story and identity, he felt a soft but solid push inside his heart. He remembered a moment from years ago, his late wife, sitting on their porch, telling him, "Kindness means stepping forward, even when your voice trembles." She had been the braver one between them, always guiding him toward goodness when he hesitated. Her words whispered across his mind now. The traders called for attention, preparing to continue their display. They encouraged the crowd to gather closer. Samuel felt his pulse slow, as he realized the men intended to present Nalan as something to be claimed. Something that could be taken home by whoever offered the most enthusiasm. He watched Nalan shift slightly. Not out of fear, but as if grounding herself even further. She remained composed, her silence speaking more truth than any words could. The traders began encouraging people to make offers. A few voices rose. Samuel felt a twist in his stomach. He didn't like the direction this was heading. Something inside him, something he hadn't felt in a long time, awakened. He stepped forward before he knew he was moving. The crowd turned slightly, surprised by his sudden presence. Samuel wasn't someone who stood out. His clothes were simple, his posture relaxed, his face calm. But there was something steady in his eyes, something that made a few people fall silent. The traders looked at him with raised eyebrows, expecting a typical offer. But Samuel didn't make one. Instead, he spoke in a soft, even tone that somehow carried clearly through the room. "What gives you the right to stand here and tell her story for her?" The room grew quiet. The traders stared, confused. Samuel's voice wasn't angry. It wasn't loud. But it carried a seriousness they didn't expect. Samuel took another step, looking directly at Nalin, not the traders. Then something happened, something small, but meaningful. For the first time since he entered, Nalin's eyes lifted and met his. Her expression remained calm. But in her gaze he sensed something, perhaps surprise, or curiosity, or simply acknowledgement that someone saw her as a person, not a symbol. It lasted only a moment, but it was enough. The traders hurried to speak before the crowd could shift in opinion. They laughed awkwardly, brushing off Samuel's question. They claimed they were simply helping her find a place. They insisted their intentions were good. But Samuel wasn't convinced. He looked around the room. Many people now seemed unsure, glancing between Nalin and the traders. Uncertainty was settling into the crowd, replacing curiosity with something gentler, concern. Perhaps. Samuel stepped forward once more. His voice stayed calm, steady, unthreatening. "This isn't right," he said simply. "She should be treated with respect. She isn't a thing to be claimed." His words weren't loud, but they carried a quiet truth that pressed into the room like a soft wind. Nalin continued watching him, her expression unreadable yet softened at the edges. Samuel didn't know whether she trusted him. He didn't expect her to. He only wanted to speak the truth he felt. The traders shifted nervously. Their confidence had slipped. The energy in the room had changed. Samuel didn't plan what he did next. He just knew he had to do something that ensured Nalin would not be taken by anyone who saw her as less than she was. He stepped forward fully, facing the traders directly, and said the words that surprised even him. "She leaves with me." The room reacted with quiet gasps, not of shock but of astonishment at his courage. Samuel didn't raise his voice. He didn't force or threaten. He spoke calmly, making his intention clear. He was offering Nalin freedom, not possession. Nalin studied him carefully, trying to understand this quiet man who had stepped forward on her behalf without asking for anything in return. Samuel remained still, not reaching for her or moving closer. He simply stood as someone offering a safe path. And in that moment, something shifted not only in Nalin's fate, but in Samuel's life as well. He didn't know what the next hours or days would hold. He didn't know whether she would trust him, but he knew with certainty that stepping forward was the right thing to do. And sometimes, a single quiet decision can change two lives at once. Samuel did not fully understand what he had stepped into when he decided to take Nalin with him. He only knew one thing with complete certainty. She deserved safety, dignity, and a chance to tell her own story when she chose to. That simple truth guided every step he took as he stood there in front of the traders. After a few murmurs and confused whispers in the crowd, the traders reluctantly agreed to let Nalin go with Samuel. They didn't want to create tension in front of so many curious eyes. And Samuel, with his quiet firmness, had unexpectedly influenced the mood in the room. No one wanted to challenge him directly, especially when his request was peaceful and reasonable. Samuel offered a gentle nod to Nalin, not moving too close, not extending a hand she might not be ready to accept. He simply gave her space to decide. For a moment, she did not move. Her expression stayed calm, but her eyes held a quiet storm of questions. She was used to watching people carefully, understanding their intentions without needing many words. And now she stood before a man whose intentions seemed almost too simple to believe. Still, she walked toward him. The crowd slowly parted, allowing her to pass. No one reached out to stop her. No one spoke loudly now. Samuel walked ahead just far enough that she could follow him without feeling guided or pressured. The two of them stepped out of the saloon into the open air, where the sky was turning golden with the late afternoon sun. Nalin breathed in deeply. Outside felt different, lighter, easier to think. She tilted her head up slightly, letting the warmth brush across her face. Samuel noticed this, but did not stare. He respected her space, letting the quiet between them feel natural. They walked together toward Daisy, Samuel's old mare, who flicked her tail lazily as the pair approached. Samuel gently patted her neck, then stepped aside so Nalin could see the horse clearly. He didn't force her to ride or hurry. He simply waited. "We'll head to my ranch," he said softly. "You'll be safe there. Only if you want to." Nalin watched him for a long moment. She saw no urgency in his posture, no hidden demand in his voice. He spoke as if offering a choice, not giving directions. That alone softened her guardedness just a little. Samuel prepared the saddle and mounted first, then offered to walk beside her if she preferred not to ride. She seemed to think about it, then gently placed her hand on the mare's side, brushing the horse's hair with a slow, thoughtful gesture. Daisy stayed perfectly still, sensing Nalin's calm nature. Samuel smiled quietly. "She likes you." For the first time since he had met her, Nalin's expression shifted only slightly, but enough to show she appreciated the small attempt at kindness. She finally stepped toward the horse, allowing Samuel to help her sit comfortably. He kept his movements slow, so she wouldn't feel rushed or uneasy. With everything ready, they set off toward the ranch. The path stretched long and peaceful, lined with tall grass that swayed like waves in the wind. The fading sun painted the sky in soft pinks and oranges. Neither of them spoke for a while, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It felt more like the calm that settles after a long, heavy day. Samuel walked beside the horse most of the way, keeping his pace slow. Every now and then, he glanced up to check if Nalin seemed comfortable. Each time, she sat quietly, her eyes on the horizon, absorbing the shape of the new world she was entering. Eventually, Samuel spoke, his voice gentle so it didn't break the softness of the moment. "I know this must be confusing. I didn't mean to interfere in your life. I just couldn't stand how they were treating you." Nalin listened, but she did not answer. She wasn't ready to speak, and Samuel did not expect her to. He continued walking, letting his words settle without pressing her for a response. "I don't know where your family is," he continued softly, "but I'll help you find them when you're ready. You don't owe me anything." Something in those words loosened a knot inside her chest. She lowered her gaze slightly, thinking of her family faces she could picture so clearly in her memory. Voices she could almost hear when she closed her eyes. She had no idea where they were now, but knowing Samuel didn't intend to trap her or force her into a new life brought a small sense of relief. As they traveled deeper toward Samuel's ranch, the land around them grew quieter. Birds circled above, and the grass whispered with each passing breeze. Nalin felt her heartbeat settle into a steady rhythm, matching the horse's slow steps. By the time they reached the ranch, the sky had turned into a deep, calm blue, sprinkled with early stars. Samuel's home sat peacefully at the base of a small hill, a simple wooden house with a porch and a soft glow from the lamp inside. It wasn't large or fancy, but it felt honest, like a place built with care and quiet hands. Samuel stopped near the fence, letting Nalin climb down on her own. She slid gently off Daisy, keeping her balance with surprising grace. Samuel led Daisy toward the stable while Nalin looked around the ranch, taking in the open fields, the wooden fences, the soft lantern light from the windows. The place felt different from the town, gentler, calmer. Here, the world didn't stare at her with loud curiosity. Here, she felt anonymous, which was a kind of safety. Samuel returned from the stable and approached slowly. "You can rest inside," he said, his voice kind but still respectful of her distance. "There's a guest room. I can make some warm tea if you'd like." Nalin hesitated. She had spent the last few days surrounded by strangers who acted as if they owned her. Trust did not come easily, but Samuel's tone was sincere, and she could see that he wanted nothing from her but her comfort. She followed him inside. The house was small but warm. Wooden shelves lined the walls, filled with books, jars of herbs, and simple tools. A woven blanket hung across one wall, adding color to the cozy space. Samuel lit a lamp on the table, creating a soft glow that made the room feel even more peaceful. "I'll bring you something warm," he said gently. "You can sit where you like." Nalin lowered herself onto a chair, keeping her back straight and her hands folded calmly. Samuel moved around the kitchen area quietly, his steps light. He placed a small kettle on the stove, and soon the soft sound of heating water filled the silence. As he prepared the tea, Nalin studied him carefully. He moved with purpose but never rushed. His face held a quiet seriousness, one that suggested he had lived through hardships but didn't let them turn him cold. His eyes stayed gentle, even in silence. Samuel placed a steaming cup of herbal tea in front of her. The scent of mint and chamomile filled the air. Nalin wrapped her hands around the warm cup, finding comfort in the gentle heat. He sat at the opposite end of the table, not too close, but not too far. "You don't have to talk if you don't want to," he said. "Take your time." Nalin looked at him, and then nodded slowly. It wasn't a full conversation, but it was her first clear response to him. Samuel accepted it with quiet gratitude. In that moment, something peaceful settled between them. Not trust, not yet, but an understanding. A beginning. They remained at the table until the night deepened outside. Samuel eventually stood and showed her the guest room, its bed neatly prepared with clean blankets. The room was simple, but warm, with a window that looked out onto the quiet fields. "You can rest," Samuel said softly. "If you need anything, I'll be right here." Nalin stood silently in the room, holding the edge of the blanket between her fingers. She glanced back at Samuel, studying him once more. And then, for the first time, she spoke. Her voice was soft, but clear. "Thank you." Samuel didn't smile widely, but the soft expression in his eyes said enough. "Of course," he replied quietly. "Rest well." He gently closed the door, leaving her alone in the peaceful room. Nalin lay down slowly, listening to the distant sounds of the night. For the first time in many days, she felt a little safer, a little less alone. Her journey was far from over, but now, maybe for the first time, she felt a small spark of hope that tomorrow might be different. And Samuel, sitting quietly by the lamp in the next room, felt the same. For the next few days, Nalin stayed at Samuel's ranch, quietly learning the rhythm of the place. The mornings were filled with soft light spreading across the fields, and the evenings were peaceful with the calming sound of crickets. Samuel kept to his quiet routine, never rushing, never intruding on her space. He made sure she had food, water, warm blankets, and anything she needed. But he always waited for her to speak first, and if she chose silence, he respected that too. At first, Nalin spoke only a few words, but even those few were enough to show Samuel that she was slowly beginning to trust him. She studied him carefully each day, trying to understand the kind of man he was. His actions stayed consistent, gentle, patient, honest. He didn't ask personal questions, nor did he try to force her into conversations. He simply offered a safe space. As days passed, Nalin began walking around the ranch, exploring little corners of the property. She watched the chickens scratching near the fence, listened to the wind brushing through the tall grass, and sometimes sat under the large oak tree that stood like an old guardian of the land. The quietness of the ranch brought her a sense of comfort that she hadn't felt in a long time. Samuel noticed her slowly relaxing. He would see her watching the sunset from the porch, or brushing Daisy's soft mane with gentle hands. Every time he saw her connecting with the land and the animals, he felt a calm settle in his heart. One afternoon, while Samuel repaired a wooden gate near the pasture, Nalin approached him. She didn't speak right away. She watched him work, noticing how careful he was with each movement. He looked up, offering a warm smile, and stepped aside so she could stand near the fence. "You can stay here as long as you need," he said softly. "No one will bother you." Nalin nodded. She knew he meant it. But outside the ranch, the world was still turning, and not everyone had forgotten what happened at the saloon. The traders who had brought her to town were not pleased with how easily their plan had fallen apart. Their pride had been hurt, and they were not comfortable with the idea that someone as quiet as Samuel had undone their intentions simply by stepping forward. Still, they didn't come to the ranch. Not yet. They stayed in town, whispering among themselves, trying to decide what to do next. Some of the townspeople overheard their conversations and felt uneasy. Word began to travel slowly through the community. Nothing loud or alarming, but enough to make a few people worry about what might happen. One morning, Mr. Porter from the general store rode out to the ranch. Samuel was surprised to see him, since visits were rare. Mr. Porter greeted Samuel kindly and spoke with a calm tone. "I just wanted to let you know something," he said. "There's been talk in town. Some people aren't happy you stepped in the other day." Samuel listened quietly, waiting for him to continue. "I don't believe they will cause trouble," Mr. Porter added quickly. "But it's good for you to know what's being said." Samuel thanked him and walked him back to his horse. When Mr. Porter left, Samuel thought about the news for a long moment. He didn't want Nalin to worry or feel unsafe, but he also didn't want to hide things from her. Later that afternoon, while Nalin sat under the oak tree, Samuel approached her. He sat a few feet away, allowing space between them as always. "There are some things I should tell you," he said gently. Nalin turned her head slightly, listening. "People in town are talking," he continued. "They're not angry with you. They're just unsure about what happened." Nalin blinked slowly. "About me leaving?" "Yes," Samuel said. "Some people don't like things they don't understand." Nalin looked down at the ground, her fingers brushing softly against a small leaf. She wasn't frightened, but she did feel a familiar heaviness in her chest. She had already faced enough misunderstandings, enough assumptions. She didn't want more trouble brought to Samuel's doorstep because of her presence. "You don't have to worry," Samuel said, noticing the quiet change in her expression. "Nothing bad will happen here. And you don't have to go anywhere unless you choose to." Nalin lifted her eyes and studied him. She could see honesty in the way he spoke. He was not making promises he couldn't keep. He was simply offering his support, calmly and sincerely. After a moment of silence, Nalin spoke softly. "I don't want trouble for you." "You're not trouble," Samuel replied. "People's opinions are not your responsibility." She took a deep breath. The wind lifted a few strands of her hair, and she gently moved them out of her face. That evening, after preparing a simple meal, Samuel and Nalin sat on the porch, watching the sky shift into shades of pink and gold. The ranch felt even quieter than usual, as if the land itself knew they needed a peaceful moment. Samuel leaned back in his chair. "You know," he began, "you don't have to decide anything right now. Whether you stay here a week, or a month, or longer, you're free to choose." Nalin listened, and a thought rose in her heart, a thought she had been carrying since the day she arrived. She wanted to return to her people someday, to find the family she had been separated from, but she needed time, space, and strength before beginning that journey. And here, in this calm place, she felt those things slowly returning to her. "I stay for a little while," she said quietly. "Then, I look for my family." Samuel nodded with understanding. "I'll help you," he said. "We'll take it one step at a time." Their conversation ended there, but something important had settled between them, a sense of partnership, a shared purpose. The following days passed smoothly. Nalin helped with small tasks around the ranch, like feeding the chickens or gathering herbs from the garden. Samuel repaired fences, carried water, and mended tools. They didn't talk much, but they didn't need many words to understand each other's intentions. Yet even as life grew gentler on the ranch, whispers continued in town. A few individuals wondered what had truly happened at the saloon. Others believed Samuel acted out of kindness. Some simply repeated whatever they had heard, without knowing the truth. The talk wasn't harsh, but it carried uncertainty. One late afternoon, Samuel and Nalin walked along the fence line together. The light touched the grass softly, giving everything a warm glow. Nalin looked peaceful, but Samuel could sense something on her mind. She finally spoke. "If people come here, what do we say?" Samuel paused, then answered with calm certainty. "We tell them the truth. And if they ask more, then I stand beside you," he said. "No confusion, no fear, just honesty." Nalin looked at him with steady eyes. She was beginning to understand something important about this quiet man. When he said he would stand with her, he meant it fully. He did not raise his voice, he did not try to impress others, and he did not act for attention. His strength was in his truthfulness, in the way he cared without expecting anything back. That realization warmed her heart in a way she didn't expect. As the sun dipped behind the hills, turning the sky a deep crimson, they walked back toward the house. The wind felt cooler now, brushing gently against their skin. Nalin felt calm. But she also felt aware that her presence in Samuel's life was changing things, and aware that she no longer felt alone. Before they reached the porch, Samuel stopped and looked out across the land. "No matter what happens," he said softly, "you're not facing anything alone." Nalin stood beside him, looking in the same direction. The open fields stretched out endlessly before them, a reminder that even in uncertain times, new paths could appear. And in that calm moment, she realized something important. This quiet rancher had not only changed her direction, he had given her back the ability to choose her own path. Her journey was not over. But now, she wasn't afraid of what came next. The days slowly turned into weeks, and life on the ranch settled into a quiet, peaceful rhythm. Nalin woke each morning to the soft glow of sunlight, touching the window. She would step outside and feel the cool breeze against her face, reminding her of the mornings she used to share with her family. The smell of earth, the sound of birds welcoming the day, everything felt familiar in a comforting way. Samuel continued his calm routine as well. He never expected anything from Nalin. He treated her not as a guest he needed to entertain, nor as someone who owed him gratitude, but simply as a human being deserving of respect and space. This quiet understanding made it easier for Nalin to feel at ease. As time passed, Nalin began speaking more. Her voice remained soft, but there was strength in every word she shared. She told Samuel bits of her childhood stories about the forest trails her people walked, the songs they sang during gatherings, and the simple joys of everyday life. She did not talk about her separation from her family in detail, but Samuel didn't ask. He always listened gently, allowing her to open up at her own pace. Samuel shared small pieces of his own past as well. He told her about the early days of building the ranch, about the long walks he used to take with his late wife, and about the quiet evenings they would spend watching the stars. He spoke about her not with sadness, but with gratitude, as if remembering her brought him peace rather than pain. One calm afternoon, Nalin sat under the oak tree while Samuel worked nearby, fixing a section of the fence. The sun warmed the earth, and the air smelled sweet, filled with the scent of blooming flowers. Nalin watched Samuel for a moment, appreciating the steady patience with which he handled every task. She finally spoke. "You have given me a place to breathe again." Samuel looked up from the fence, surprised yet touched by her words. "I only wanted you to feel safe," he replied gently. "I do," she said. "And because I feel safe, I can think about finding my family." Samuel nodded slowly. "When you're ready, we'll go." The decision stayed in the air between them. Gentle, yet powerful. It was not a sudden choice, but one that had grown quietly in Nalin's heart over the days she spent resting and healing. She knew she needed to return to her people. She needed to know whether her family was out there somewhere, waiting for her with hope still alive. Over the next week, Nalin and Samuel prepared for the journey. Samuel made sure Daisy was strong enough for travel, brushing her coat until it shone softly in the morning sun. Nalin packed only a few things, some dried fruit, water, and a woven band that reminded her of her people. Samuel didn't rush her. Everything was done at a slow, thoughtful pace. Before they left, Nalin took a long look at the ranch. The fields looked peaceful under the bright sky. The small house stood warm and welcoming, and the oak tree cast a comforting shade over the yard. She felt a gentle ache in her heart, a mixture of gratitude and the sadness that comes with leaving a place that had sheltered her. "You can always return," Samuel said quietly, noticing her gaze. Nalin smiled softly. "I know." They set off early one morning, the sky still painted with pale colors of dawn. Samuel walked beside Daisy while Nalin rode, keeping her posture straight and her eyes focused on the path ahead. The journey felt lighter than she expected. Perhaps it was because she wasn't traveling alone anymore. As they moved closer to the lands where Nalin's people once lived, the landscape began to shift. Tall pine trees rose along the path, and the air grew cooler and filled with the gentle scent of earth and leaves. With every mile, memories returned to Nalin, smiles of her relatives, the sound of laughter during gatherings, the soft songs sung under the stars. Each memory made her heart beat a little faster. Samuel watched her from the corner of his eye. He saw how her gaze softened when she recognized a familiar hill or stream. He knew this journey meant everything to her, and he felt honored to walk beside her. After 2 days of travel, they arrived at a small clearing near the river, a place Nalin remembered well. She stepped down from Daisy and walked toward the water. She knelt gently, touching the cool surface with her fingertips. Ripples spread outward, and she watched them with quiet hope. "My people used to come here often," she said softly. "To gather water, to tell stories." Samuel walked over slowly, giving her space but staying close enough so she wouldn't feel alone. "Do you think your family might have come this way?" "I hope so," Nalin whispered. They stayed near the river for some time, calling softly, leaving signs that could be recognized by her people, symbols drawn in the earth, gentle marks that carried meaning only those from her community would understand. As evening began to fall, Nalin and Samuel rested under a group of tall pine trees. The sky slowly shifted into shades of lavender and gold. The sound of the river flowed calmly beside them, creating a peaceful rhythm that matched the quietness in their hearts. Nalin turned to Samuel. "Thank you for coming with me," she said. "I know this journey is not yours." Samuel shook his head gently. "You're not alone in this. And as long as you don't want to be alone, I'll stay." His words were simple, but they carried a depth she had never heard from anyone except her own family. For a moment, she felt a warmth in her chest, a sense of connection that surprised her. As the stars appeared slowly above them, Samuel and Nalin grew quiet again, each lost in their own thoughts. The night was peaceful, wrapped in soft darkness and the gentle sound of nature. The next morning, as sunlight touched the treetops, Nalin heard something faint in the distance, a soft voice calling. She stood up quickly, her heart racing, but not with fear. Samuel stood too, listening carefully. Another call echoed through the trees, this one clearer. It carried a familiar tone, a familiar rhythm. Nalin's breath caught. She walked toward the sound with steady steps, and when she reached the edge of the clearing, she saw them, 2 figures standing quietly, watching her with wide, hopeful eyes. They were members of her people, relatives she had been separated from. They looked older, thinner, changed by the hardships of their own journey. But the moment their eyes met Nalin's, everything else faded. The connection between them was immediate, warm, and full of unspoken understanding. Nalin's steps quickened. The 2 figures moved forward as well, meeting her halfway. They embraced gently, holding each other with careful affection, as if afraid the moment might break if they moved too quickly. Samuel watched from a distance, his heart warming at the sight. He didn't walk forward. He knew this reunion belonged to Nalin alone. She deserved this moment of joy, of relief, of family returning like sunlight after a long night. After some time, Nalin looked back at Samuel. She motioned for him to join them. He walked forward slowly, unsure if he should intrude, but Nalin made it clear that she wanted him there. "This is Samuel," she said softly. "He helped me. He treated me with kindness." Her relatives looked at Samuel with gratitude, nodding respectfully. They didn't speak his language, but Samuel understood the meaning in their eyes. They all sat together near the river, sharing food and stories through gestures, smiles, and quiet understanding. Samuel felt peaceful, content simply to be part of something meaningful. As the sun reached its highest point, Nalin returned to Samuel's side. "They want to take me with them," she said gently. "There are more of our people nearby. They want me to return." Samuel nodded, trying to hide the ache in his chest. "You should go," he said. "This is your family." Nalin studied his face. "Yes," she said softly. "But my path does not end here." Samuel looked at her, unsure what she meant. She continued, "I will stay with my family now, but I will return to you when the time is right. Your kindness will not be forgotten." Samuel felt something warm spread through his heart, something that wasn't sadness, but hope. He nodded slowly. "You'll always have a place at the ranch," he said. "Whenever you choose to return." Nayland smiled gently. "I know." They shared a quiet moment, standing by the river that connected the past and the future. The wind carried their unspoken promise through the trees. Nayland turned toward her people. Samuel stepped back, watching her walk with them. Her step was steady. Her heart was full. She was returning to her roots, but she was also carrying a new beginning with her. Samuel watched until she disappeared into the forest. Then he began his journey home, feeling peaceful, hopeful, and grateful for the unexpected path that had brought them together. And far ahead, as Nalene walked with her family, she carried Samuel's quiet strength with her, knowing one day, when the world felt right, she would return to the man who had changed her fate, simply by stepping forward with kindness. The story didn't end. It simply opened into a new beginning, for both of them.